have, when we start working with tone and contrast, we need to make sure that we have the histogram window available to us. So if you don't have that showing, go to Window, Histogram, and make sure it's popped out somewhere for us, because this is going to be what we need to look at. It might be hidden in a tab somewhere for you or not, but just make sure Window, Histogram is popped out. Looks like everybody's got it. There we go. All right, so do we remember what the histogram's kind of telling us?
Yes.
What?
How many pixels are in each different color?
Fair, yeah, pretty much. I mean, and the way it works is each edge represents your maximums on either side. So you're at 0, right, out to 255. Now this is where Photoshop and numbers and whatnot get a little bit funky, and you don't necessarily have to understand completely what's going on here. What you need to understand though is that your histogram is 0 to 255, and it's essentially a map of all of the tones in which you've captured. So if I'm looking at this histogram, are there areas within this histogram where I have no tone?
Yeah.
Yes, right? So what that means is when I captured this photo, there were unused areas of my dynamic range in the camera. Now I could have tried a different exposure, but sometimes that's just the light that you have. Does that make sense? So as much as you may try at your exposure to get and maximize that histogram, you're not going to get it. So what we end up doing is we end up remapping these numbers so that we end up using the entire dynamic range that we can use. Does that make sense somewhat? So essentially whenever we make adjustments, for example, this histogram probably contains information more so 10 to 200. What we're trying to do is we're trying to remap so that we fill out 0 to 255. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Is that all, those are just different kinds of grays in between there? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, all the...
Yeah, different shades of black. So
Of
like, you know that color checker, right? And you know how it has those different shades of gray, and one is pure black and one is pure white.
So there's no color.
Right, so that's the tonal range essentially that we're dealing with. That black and white type stuff, you can think of these numbers as starting to think of them as luminance numbers, which is brightness, right? So essentially if we're missing 0 to 10, we're missing almost a whole stop of brightness that we could have covered in our photograph. Or if we're missing 200 to 255, we may be missing a whole stop of lightness that is just not in the photo anymore. So what we're going to do with levels and curves is stretch out that histogram. And the reason that we stretch out that histogram is the more tonal range we have in the image, the more contrast it looks like, the more details it looks like there is, the more lifelike, it doesn't look flat, and all those other things that are bad about a photograph. Any question on that, sort of, maybe? All right, so how does this work? It's not that complicated. If you create a levels adjustment layer, what we're going to do is kind of just play. So the way this guy works is there's a lot of different things, right? We looked at these little eyedroppers for, for color correction. And there's other little things going on. The main thing to understand are these numbers here, kind of contained in your levels, right? You got 0, and you've got 255, and you've got 1.0, which is your middle gray. If you adjust the right side, you move it in, makes your blacks blacker. If you move in the white side in, makes your whites whiter. Yep.
Why wouldn't you just change the exposure?
This is changing the exposure.
Oh. Like
It's just doing it in a different way.
Okay.
And the reason you might want to do it this way is you have more control. So, and you are specifically mapping numbers. So when you start to print, you know what you've done. I don't want to get too far ahead because like the numbers can get really, you can get bogged down in worrying about the numbers. It's more so what these things are doing that I'm concerned about right now. And like you'll pick up the number stuff a little bit later on. So this moves in and adjusts your highlights. So shadows, highlights, midtones. Towards the right, darkens your midtones. Towards the left, lightens the midtones. Down here are what are called output levels. Output levels will change how the image displays 255. So what that means is it clips out information. What I'm doing when I'm doing this is if I move it down to 200, everything 255 to 200 now only displays at 200. Does that make sense? Somewhat. This will make you'll find out when we use this. Same thing over here. If I move this in, you can see all my blacks get lifted. I've essentially told Photoshop anything between 0 and 69 needs to display at a 70 level output. Does that somewhat make sense? Okay. So how do you use this? Well, you just move the sliders. Done. So what did I do?
Your goal is just to fill the whole histogram.
Yep. I want to stretch out that histogram as much as possible.
The top right one, right? Not the one that's in the property.
No, I'm going to look at it in the properties here. And that's going to, I mean, it's going to be my guide because this is showing me the histogram typically after the adjustment. And this is showing me kind of the histogram that I'm working with. So, how do I mess with this? Well, you have a variety of different ways, but easiest way, honestly, is to just move the sliders and kind of look at the image. You can set up control points so that you really get into the numbers. I don't recommend that right now. Just use your eyes, right? So one of the ways that we can also check this stuff out is we can hold Option and do our clipping. We wouldn't want to be here. Why?
Looks like you're drawing.
Well, but even if I let go, right?
Taking out a lot.
All of those black areas are areas in which there is no detail now. They're just totally black. So obviously it's too much. So I can hold my clipping and hold it over. And this is where you have to kind of remember or just straight up decide, where do I want my shadow areas to be? In this photo, where's a good area for shadows to actually kind of block up and take over? Where's shadow? Where's your black points?
Well,
The
in
church
between
door
the roof and the-
on top.
So maybe up here?
Yeah.
Where else? Just identify maybe 1 or 2 points. Down here?
I'll build it in the back shed.
Yeah, down here. Okay, so we got 3 kind of points that we're looking at to possibly be our shadows, right? So I'm gonna hold Option, and I'm gonna look at those areas. And when I see them fill up to how I want, like about that, maybe more, let's go up to 20. I'm gonna call that done. Because those are areas of shadow. I'm gonna do the same thing with my highlight side this time. And I'm gonna leave it there, right? What did we do with color correction when we did that?
Just going back in.
Look back.
Yeah, we put a point, we found the point, and then we put it back down to 0. When we're just doing tonal adjustment, we're just gonna move it. Okay? So there's a difference, and you gotta remember that. When we're doing color correction, we gotta put them back to where they were. When we're doing tonal adjustment, we just leave them. And this is why it's gonna be helpful to start naming the layers. Because you wanna know, if you use levels for every adjustment, which you can do, you may need to know that, one level was color correction, the other was the tonal adjustment. You may not remember that right off the bat. So for the highlight side, we're gonna do the same thing. Hold Option, click. Where do I want my highlights to be? What are gonna be good areas of highlights?
Top of the steeple.
Top of the steeple is probably good. Maybe that roof in the back. Maybe some of the white in the actual church windows. So we're gonna hold Option. I'm gonna keep going. And right there. Before, after, that looks a little bit better. And then now if there are any midtones, if I need to darken or make them a little bit lighter, I'm just gonna take my middle slider here and move it to the left to make it a little bit lighter, or to the right to make it a little bit darker. And that honestly is kind of personal. I might lighten it up just a touch. And before, after. And that's done. Does that make sense? So I can use my clipping, I can use my eyes, or I could just look at the histogram and be like, I'm probably gonna need to move here, and I'm probably gonna need to move here. And I do that just by kind of looking at how the histogram falls out. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? So just remember, when we're doing tonal correction, we'll leave the sliders where they are. When we're doing color correction, we'll move the sliders back. All right, next thing, I'll show you another little demo with what you call it, the levels. This time we're gonna open up Bodhi Bed. Should be above that one. Same, what you call it? I don't know, folder? That's what I'm talking about. Open image, don't mess with it, just let it be crazy and hit open image. That's the whole entire idea.
Which one?
Yes, yes. Go ahead and make your levels, adjustment layer,
I don't have a bed.
and look at the histogram. What's happening here?
Oh, here we go.
Well, it's filled.
It is filled, but what's wrong with it?
It has clippings.
Yeah, it's got a lot of clipping, right? It's got a lot of clipping on the right and in the left, so we're losing a lot of shadow information, we're losing a lot of highlight information. This time, we're actually gonna try to fix that. So, Faye, you had that light, right? And you tried to burn it, and
Yes.
nothing happened?
Yes.
This would have been the way to try to fix that, okay? So what you're gonna end up doing is instead of using the sliders up here to begin with, we're gonna use the sliders down here under the output levels. We gotta figure out how we're gonna do that though. So the best way to do this is use your info points again.
Can you do that with the JPEG?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a JPEG.
Okay.
It's just opened in RAW because that's the way it's set. So again, we're gonna have to use our eyes and use a little bit of a judgment call. So first thing we need to do is we need to find an area in which we want to retain or get tone back. So if we're using our little color sampler here, we're floating over these areas that are totally blown out, right? We should see something that says 255, 255, 255, 255. In the bowl, for sure.
On the right side of the railing.
Yeah, on the railing over here, you get a little bit of it. I'm gonna go ahead and put one in the bowl because that's just there's a lot of it there. So 255, 255, 255. And I'm gonna drop a point there. I'm gonna just use that as a total reference point. What's that? No, I'm dropping a little color sampler tool. Just an info point. So I have a reference up here in my info panel. And now I'm gonna look for my black point. So again, area where I may want shadow. There kind of looks like there's a leg back here. So I might come in this area. Yeah, there's a lot of 0, 0, 0, and go ahead and make my point there. These are reference points. This is saying I do, after my adjustment, want some tone there. And I do, after my adjustment, want some tone there. Because what would happen if we printed this?
There'd be no ink on paper or?
There'd be no ink. It'd just be a white hole in your print if you put that there. And if you did this, it would be a black pool of ink. So we don't want that. So we need to remap our output points. We do that by using this bottom slider in the levels adjustment. Using my info points, I'll start with number 1 because that's my highlights. I'm gonna look up here at my info points, and then I'm gonna use my output slider and slowly move that in. What I should see is the numbers change, and they do. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull that into 240.
How do you know
How do I know what to put it into?